Welcome, everyone, to the Songwriters on Process podcast. My name is Benno Papari, and on this podcast, I take a deep dive into the writing process behind some of the world's best songwriters. By way of background, I am a former English professor. I have a PhD in English language and literature, and I'm a writer myself. So this is a conversation about writing between two writers. My goal has always been to treat songwriters the same way that we treat prose writers, just as writers, plain and simple. So that's all we focus on. I don't care about tour stories, favorite bands, how bands get their name, favorite foods, anything like that. This is, again, a deep dive into the songwriting process with some of the world's best songwriters. And with that, let's get into today's episode. And today on the pod, it is a special one, a legit icon, Lenny Kaye, who has for over 50 years been Patti Smith's guitarist in the Patti Smith Band. He's written songs with her, collaborated extensively, but at age 79, he has released his first solo album. It is called Goin' Local. It is fantastic. Lenny Kaye, really talking punk pioneer. He's been called the godfather of garage rock. Where do I even begin with superlatives? I'm not going to talk anymore, only to tell you that I love this conversation and how much he talks about the discipline it takes to get to the stage that he is in. Just a treasure trove here of not just advice, but I think just wisdom on the writing process. Got to listen to the guy. Anyway, Lenny Kaye's solo album, and I should say he's also still active, of course, with Patti Smith, but his first solo album out now is called Goin' Local. Here is my interview with Lenny Kaye. All right, so I always start with a very simple question, and that is, do you think that it is important to create in some fashion every day, no matter how much you may not want to, how much you may not feeling it? Or do you feel like that by doing that and writing every day regardless, that that may make things sound derivative or just may make you lose interest in the whole idea in the first place?
No, I try to think creatively every day, not often. Sometimes, if I'm working on something, I'll come back to it. Real life definitely intrudes, but I try to keep something underway and derive pleasure out of either putting words together or music together or thinking about it, which is another part of the creative process. But I believe that, each day you spend in your imagination is, another day you're still alive, and, so I try to hew to that, once I get finished with the mounds of stuff that needs attention, uh, practically, I try to set aside some time to just, wander wander in my medulla.
So what kind of writing are you doing? If it's not, I mean, are you journaling or prose writing or what is that? What kind of writing are you?
I'm
If it's
I'm
not,
I'm not I'm not a journaler. I always wished I did, but I don't. I write a bunch of stuff, a lot of music derived nonfiction, I guess you would call it. I've never had the fictional mode. Every time I've tried my hand at fiction, it sounds fairly cliched. But I try to also write songs, write lyrics, and I find that they all kind of interact in my consciousness because when you make a great sentence, it has rhythm and melody. And if you're working on a guitar solo, it has a narrative arc. So I try to move all these things along slowly. I'm a true Capricorn. I'm things take me a long time to climb that mountain. I consider it. I don't want to suddenly like say, "Oh, I got to finish this quickly," unless you're on some kind of deadline, and then deadlines are your friend. But mostly, I try to listen deeply to what I'm trying to say. That to me is the most important thing in a song, in an article, in a liner note, in some kind of biographical thing I'm working on. on an artist. What is it you want to say, and get past the first thing that comes to mind, but listen deeply to yourself, and that requires keeping that brain fluid. I mean, and if you do it every day, you know how to do it. It's like working out. You have to keep the rhythm and melody of your mind working. And so I'm lucky enough. I have the time and the projects to do that in.
Now, what do you mean? I like that. Listen deeply to what you're trying to say. So, does that involve looking at the words that you've written and thinking if that's the intended meaning, or is it without the words, sitting by yourself and being introspective? Because I like what you said there, but I'd like to know how you do that.
You have to listen. Sometimes, for instance, you're writing a song. You're banging away on a really good lick, and then you want to take it to the next part of the song. Well, you could take it to the next obvious chord, but you really have to sit and listen deeply. What is the song trying to tell you? What are you trying to tell in the song? How does it make it something that's not predictable? I don't write a lot of songs, and aside from my 3 books, I really don't write a lot of books. you know, uh, so you really have to understand that what you're doing does not become generic. Essentially, I mean, I have a side band called Adrift. It's a psych goth jam band, I call it, with a drummer who loves Rush, and the bass player, 6 string bass player with pedals, likes industrial music. And then there's me. And when we're in the practice room and we come on a really cool lick, the instinct is just, let's do it. And I'm always saying, no, that's totally predictable. What we want to do is reverse. If we think it, oh, we're going to make it louder, let's make it softer. Let's put another weird lick that we have and see if we can align them together. I don't want to do generic songs. I write 1 or 2 songs a year when I'm very inspired, because I just don't want to add to the glut. There's thousands and thousands and millions of songs out there, and many of them sound alike. I want to make sure my song, or the sentence that I'm writing, really has a place in this world that no AI could make it for me. It has to come out of my sensibility in the way I say things, and and it has to have relevance. Again, it took me all these years to come up with my debut solo album, as it's referred to. But the fact is that I had to wait until I had the right songs, that it wasn't, okay, here's a song, I want to rock you baby, that's like 14 other songs about rocking your baby. I wanted to make sure everything had meaning. And as I wrote it, I was explaining it to myself. I was listening to what the song was telling me. That's essentially it. I you can try to push a song around, or you get bored with it, so you just put some random thing in there. But the song will let you know when it needs something. Same way when you're in the studio and the song is asking for a piece of percussion, or a keyboard part, and you don't know what that is, and you're fooling around, and all of a sudden something comes up in the distance, and you try to kind of pull it in to the consciousness of the song, so the song says, yeah, that's what I want. I believe in the primacy of the material.
You said something, one of my favorite books on writing is called On Writing Well by William Zinsser. And he has a great bit of advice. And he says, if a phrase comes to you too easily, don't use it because you probably heard it before. But that's like in real time, right? Like if I'm writing something and I'm thinking, like I was writing something today, and I used the word unfettered access, the phrase. And I thought, oh my gosh, unfettered access, you could probably has been used all the time. And I thought, it came to me too easily. I need another phrase. Um, so do you recognize the derivative nature if you do think, oh, this is too derivative or it's what something has someone has already said many times before, do you realize that after the fact, or is that something in the moment you're saying, "Oh, yeah"? Because I guess what I'm saying is I worry that if as a writer, if I stop myself in my tracks as I'm writing it, that may slow my process down, but I'll go back later and because I don't wanna lose the momentum in real time,
You don't
if
wanna
that makes
lose what you're trying to say by getting hung up, and a lot of people who kind of get hung up, especially these days when you could work on an opening paragraph for 2 months, given all the things you can do with, word processing. Sometimes you forget that once you're in the groove, stay in the groove and clean up the mess later. But I'm a careful writer. I like wordplay. I like the way words bounce off each other. And, sometimes if you write something like unfettered access, well, you can just mess with that unfettered, unfettered and bettered access. I don't know. You could have fun with language. And I mean, I've been writing now, I have to say, for 60 years. So I'm very connected with my process, how I write, whether it's an email, which has its own artistic implications, or an article, or something as ambitious as my crooner book, You Call It Madness, which verges at times on musical poetry. Um, you find a way to say something that reveals the truth of what it is. I mean, we were talking before about uh, literary autobiography, and I have to say, I look at Whalen's book. I know I wrote at least half of it out of my head because I had his voice in my head, but I'm also folding in interviews with 20 other of his associates. I'm folding in research I've done. But I'm seeing the world through his eyes and I hear his voice. And that's, and you have to find your own artistic voice. I at this point in my writing life, I know my artistic voice. It's whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, it doesn't matter. That's how I write. And when I sit down at the quartuio, as I call it, I can get into that mode and then mess with it. And again, you have to think of those two things. What am I trying to say, and how can I say it that communicates it? Uh, that's not a cliche in the same way as song. We all want that song to go from the one chord to the four chord, and it's been done a million times, and most of the time it's effective. But sometimes, especially when I'm actually writing a song, I don't want it to go to where you think it's gonna go. I wanna surprise you. I want I yeah, which is hard for me to get musicians when I'm playing somewhere to come on and jam with me because my songs got little twists in them. And, a songwriter like, for instance, Kevin Kinney, one of my great friends, he's always inviting me to sit in with him and, his songs have those 3 chords moving along very creatively and singing his song, and I can doodle along. But it's very difficult for me to say, "Come on up and let's, rock this."
The writer Dorothy Parker said, I hate writing, I love having written." Which I love, and I feel the same way. So
I
how
feel
often
the opposite. I
yeah,
love
well, that's what I was
writing.
gonna ask you.
When I've written something, I'll look at it again and say, "Man, that was a good line." But for me, it's over, just like when I'm working on a piece of something, I have a very long tail, a history, of things that I've done. But to me, I've enjoyed them in the doing. That's what David Lynch says, if we want another great thing. The pleasure is in the doing. When I'm done with something, whether it's a record, an article, a liner note, some song that I've written, it's over. I like writing songs because you can perform them. And then they take on a different life. Liner notes, I don't know if I can perform a good set of liner notes, but I, to me, I don't, I like to look forward. I like to get up in the morning and say, what is in front of me? Because everything I've done, I've enjoyed that moment of creation. Now it belongs to the people. It might be a hit, might probably won't be, but I've enjoyed participating in its unfolding. And once I say, okay, this is the mix, this is it, we're done. I'm on to the next thing because I don't want to get into remembering how it felt. All of my books, I've loved doing them. They were so great when I'm deep in a chapter of lightning striking, uncovering some wacky rabbit hole that I can go down at will. That's when I'm happiest. But once it comes out, and I always dream of it coming out. Oh, when am I going to hold this book in my hand? Oh, is it ever going to be done? Lightning striking. I thought that was 2 years. 2 months a chapter. Bam, bam. No, it took 6 years, and 6 months per chapter, and I cut two of them. So it's like, yeah, uh, I enjoy the process. After that, it's just something that sits on a shelf, and I'm happy to have it there. And occasionally, I'll pull it down and think how brilliant I was, or not. But but I'm all about the moment, the present moment of seeing something open its heart to you.
I've got a great quote up here by Conan O'Brien, and it involves the process. And it's what you were mentioning earlier. He said, a lot of writing is sitting and thinking and eating donuts. And he said that on a
I would
podcast.
slightly revise that. Sitting and thinking and smoking pot. That's what
Okay.
I do.
So, yeah.
Because that's WD-40 for the mind. That's what I like to
So,
say.
but you had referenced something like that earlier. You had mentioned, and that is, you know, I I'm working on a second book now, and I I I'm spending far more time thinking about what I'm going to write rather than writing. And on one hand, that makes me feel like when I'm ready to write, I'm going to be ready to go. I guess my point is what he's saying is that people think I would tell my students that if your writing process only takes place, if you think your writing process only takes place while you're writing, you'll never get anything done. Your writing process is taking place as you are eating donuts, working out, smoking pot, sleeping, eating, drinking, whatever, walking. I think we have to think that way as writers, right? That you're
I don't divide that stuff because if I'm driving in the car and thinking about something I'm writing and a great line comes to me and hopefully I won't forget it by the end of the ride, which I do all too often. Um, yeah, that's part of the process thinking about it. But putting your ass in the chair, everyone says, "How do I become a great writer?" Put your ass in the chair. Sit there. Sit there for 15 minutes, even if you haven't figured out what you're going to say. But say anything. Get the juices flowing. Spend and I'm about good for about 3 hours when I'm in writerly mode because after that if I can get 2 pages out of the 3 hours, I'm done for the day. I'm ready to have a cocktail on the porch and I think I'm ready. But it's I like my hands on the keyboard, whether it's musical or not. I'm not much of a practicer. I've always say, oh, I have to learn these words and I'm going to get it. I go down there in 15 minutes and then I'm like, my mind is wandering to something else. I believe doing is important. That's why when I finished my record, I found a studio 8 minutes from my house. really good guy, a guy I've known for years who had a studio in mid New Jersey who moved to Delaware Water Gap. So I could drive over there. If I forgot something, I could go back to the house and get it. And I've been thinking about finishing my record for 15 years, but I just decided, I'm gonna, I'm gonna book a weekend, 6 hours a day. Okay, go there, sit down, have the stuff in front of you, work on it. By the end of the 6 hours, something's there, guitar solo, vocal, some abstruse thing that, kind of comes up. And that's it. And you do that for a year and a half, as I did. All of a sudden, I finished my record. I didn't think, oh, I have to get it. I just did it. And that's my process. I can't say because life will interfere with you. Like, you can say, oh, I'm going to write today, but geez, I got to pay these bills. And then, oh man, the back porch is a mess. And all of it is important to do in one's life. But if I say, okay, I have something to write, I'm going to sit there and do it. I'm going to start it. And then your juices and your intuition takes over. I mean, again, I've been writing for 60 years. I have a file cabinet filled to the brim when I was like what I call uh, a journalistic writer. Yeah, I was writing for magazines in the 70s and 80s under four different names. Just bang it out. What if Elvis had lived? You just do crap like that. $25. Hey, or record reviews. But it's what I know now is that once you start and figure out your direction, this it will unfold in front of you, and sometimes it's harder, or sometimes you have to realize that you haven't done your proper research. So you got to go off and, listen to some of the records you're yapping about. But you gotta sit there and do it. You can think about it all you want, and that becomes its own unself-fulfilling prophecy. Because then when you get to the time to do it, you have all these ideas, but they're still a mess. I also find, especially with my books, that having an outline really helps.
Hmm.
Now, when with my crooner book, which I didn't really know what the heck it was going to be, it was, I wrote about it every time I had like a different chapter, a different part of my hero's life, Russ Columbo. I'd started. And then finally, and it's such a weird book that I didn't even try to sell it. I just like wound up having about, I don't know, 15 or 20 chapters. And then I made an outline. I guess that's the thinking about it. How, chapter one, this is what I got to cover. My lightning striking. I had when I did the proposal, okay, here's New Orleans, 1957. What am I going to cover? So this is my little topics in there. You move them around, you do this, but I had a sense of architecture. That didn't mean that when I sat down, I knew what each section was going to be, but I knew I had it in much. I'm going to go into Cosmo Matassa's studio when they're making Fats Domino's first record. I'm going to be there. I'm going to construct Cosmo's studio around me, which happens to be now the dryer in a dry cleaning establishment on the side of the French Quarter. But you can go into the back and there's the same room, hasn't expanded, and you can imagine Earl Palmer sitting there and Lee Allen over there with the horns and Fats, not quite at the. It gives you a sense of where and how to do it. But I found that really, if you're doing something long form, having even a vague framework to go for helps. And then you can go in there and do the specific work, not even so much in sequence. I started the lightning striking in the Philadelphia chapter because I thought it would be the easiest. Well, it wasn't as hard as the metal chapter, but that was fun.
I agree. The my only concern with an outline is that outlines can be limiting because they don't allow for detours if they're too rigid, right? I mean, I think I have a general structure, but my concern is that if it's too much of a focused outline, like, the linear 1 AB, 2 AB, what we were taught in school, if you do it that way, that doesn't allow for your brain for you to go in new directions because you feel like you've got to stick with that.
Well, I mean, it's just an outline, really. You can, it's just kind of a roadmap. But
Yeah.
anytime you want to leave the GPS and go to some wacky town and find something you've never found before, I just use it as a kind of roadmap to get from point A to point Z. But once you're on the trip, it will reveal itself depending on what you find. When I was doing the Memphis chapter and deep into the weird artists of Sun Records, man, I would veer off all the time. Who is Junior Parker? Okay, I'm going to find that out. Who is this crazy guy, Pat Hare, that was arrested for murder 2 years later? Wow, I'm gonna. Yeah, it's just like kind of a journey and to do, I mean, with Waylon, I knew his story. I knew how I wanted it to develop. But of course, in sitting with him and doing 50 or 60 hours of interviews, asking him the same question 4 different days just to see what else he's going to come up with, you know, and also just living at his house and riding around in his Jaguar while he's pointing out this. And, all of a sudden, the skeleton of the book grew grew organs and leaves and muscles and came to life as consciousness. And when you inhabit a book, it's like living in a house. I have a house, but this room that I'm sitting in, used to be a bedroom. But one day I thought, man, I'm ready to, so all of a sudden things change. What doesn't change is sitting there and writing the sentence. And to me, that's a kind of fun thing because you have a lot of latitude with language. And the way I was schooled when I first read rock writing back in the Crawdaddy days by writers like Sandy Pearlman and Richard Meltzer and John Landau, and of course the editor of Crawdaddy, Paul Williams, was that you could make music through your writing. If you're writing about music, you want it to have the same energy and illumination and insight as the piece of music you're writing on. And that was such a valuable lesson. And when I started as a writer, I was much more precious. I was like, oh, but then I came under the mentorship of Richard Robinson, who was editing 6 magazines at the time. He was editing Go. He was editing Hit Parader. He was writing for 4 different, English magazines. And I started writing for his magazines. And he taught me that, this is art, of course, but it's also deadline journalism. You're working for the New York Daily News, man. You got to crank out those 6 articles by the end of the day. And pretty soon, man, I knew how to do that. And to do that and also make it artistic, that's that's a trick. I never wanted to be just a beat reporter, just the facts. I wanted to enlighten and illuminate. I never liked the word rock critic because that implies that you're making decisions, artistic decisions on stuff. And it's my opinion. It's everybody has them, and but my job as a writer about music is to show its process, how the song came to be, how the artist worked in the studio, how how the intentions of the artist might have changed by the variabilities of the studio. I mean, I've made a lot of records, and let me tell you, you're not in control of the process, no matter what the finished product is, and no matter what idiot says anything about it. That's that take, that day, that moment in time, your guitar sound, your frame of mind. That's how a record is made, and that's not quantifiable. So I try to look at the music I make from the viewpoint of what the artist hoped he could be or she could be in a perfect world. And, that means not judging a pop artist with the same decision making as you would someone who's dealing with the more artistic elements of a piece of music. And I like both of them. I like a great pop chant, and I like a piece of free jazz that moves beyond rhythm and melody and becomes the music of the spheres.
All right, shifting gears slightly, walk me through that ritual. I'm fascinated by the artist's ritual. So, do you have, when you wake up, is there a certain room you like to write in, certain time of day? What's that? How important is the ritual to your process?
Depends on what I have to do. You know, a lot of my work is work as opposed to going in. Usually at night is where I like futz around with the guitar, but I don't really have a ritual. Um, I've written all over this house. I started out in the basement, and now I'm up on the second floor, which is much nicer, I have to say. But when I write um, or create music, I'm just focused on the piece. It doesn't really matter where it happens. I loved when I was doing my crooner book that I was on tour a lot. So I could go to the library knowing that Russ Columbo played in Cincinnati in March of 1933, get up after the show much earlier than the rest of the band, and go and look at the Cincinnati papers from early night from March of 1903. Read the reviews of the concert that they did, including the wacky opening vaudeville acts, and and then just go right. Just go right. I've sat in cafes and write. I'm if I have something to write, I will write it. I'm not a big notebook person, so I do like the formality of sitting at the keyboard and doing it. Songs are different. I'll be humming a song in my head, and I'll think of what that next line might be that I've been chewing on, and so I'll try to even on the phone try to record myself when I'm driving along. But mostly I don't really have a ritual. I like to have a cup of tea and just sit there and say, okay, let's get this done.
How important is the role of motion, whether it's for, not just driving, but also walking, being outside, whether it's for a little cure for being in a rut or whether you get ideas? How important is that to your process?
Mm, there's nothing that I can say that, I don't like walk around, take the dog for a walk and suddenly, come on, we have to finish pissing on that fire hydrant. You got to get home. I got an idea. It's much more casual with me. Um, I know that I have a piece of writing that I have to have done by a certain time, or I have a song that has been sitting around with two verses that needs finishing, and I'm going in the studio that weekend. And come on, sit there, get those words. You can change them if you like, but let's figure out what the song can be. And so I really don't have a process mainly because I work every day. I mean, sometimes days I have to mow the lawn. But every day I have a little list of things that I need to move on. And, today, since my album is now out and completed, and I'm going to start going into the studio again in a couple of weeks. I want to look at what I've done. So that's my day, look at what I know, make a list, keyboard part, and maybe I'll get one together here, or maybe I'll just go into the studio and say, fire me up that Hammond and let me see what my three fingers will do, and we'll grab an idea and develop it. But I'm because I'm lucky enough to be working creatively all the time. And some of it is fun creating. I have a show on Sirius XM twice a week, Monday and Tuesday, 8 p.m. to 12 p.m. Bouncing off the Sirius satellite to your speaker of choice,
I love it. It's a great show.
and the platters that matters with accompanying chatters. So I work off a script because I just want to, because I get my bon mots in there. And that's creative writing. I know that sometime this week I'm going to have to sit down and spend 2.5 hours saying witty things about the songs I'm going to play. And, in some ways it's formulaic, and in some ways I'd use the same joke 4 years ago. But on the other hand, I'm banging it away. And I'll write the script for the 4 hour show in like 2.5 hours. Takes me an hour and a half to record it. And I've exercised my brain in that way. I don't have another book in me at the moment. I really am happy with my 3.5 books, actually, if you count Rock 100 that I did with David Dalton in the '70s. Um, because I need, like songs, and books need to be written. I'm not just going to fill up shelf space in shelf spaces that are overflowing with a million volumes that the world might or might not need. And you also have to feel the passion for writing a book. All of my books, I was lucky with the Whalen book because it came to me and we loved each other. We enjoyed each other's presence. The Crooner book, I got to say, my great work. You know, really fun to do. Not a lot of audience, but who cares? And my rock and roll book, Lightning Striking, kind of says to me what I needed to say about the music and its impressions on me, and its history from its beginning to when rock and roll moves from uh, inspiration to an innovation to interpretation, as many musics do, the blues, Dixieland jazz. They're not going to change. And rock and roll at this point, everything that's been done with an electric guitar kind of has been done. So welcome the 21st century. But I said pretty much what I wanted to say. Now I'm working on my music, and I got some really cool new songs in the hopper and some old ones that need revisiting. Um, and that's that's my creative life, moving these formless ideas into artifacts to find artistic closure.
All right, let's end with this. Other people's writing. When you read, are you a genre person, an author person? Who do you like to read? Obviously, you're a voracious reader, but how do you decide what the next book is you're going to read?
I go into a bookstore and I find something that tickles my fancy. I'm not so much of a genre reader anymore. As a kid, I was very much into science fiction, and I read all the great science fiction classics. And now science fiction seems a little abstruse. It's all these very long series. I don't know. I really love the interstellar that viewpoint that science fiction gave me when I was a teenager. Uh, Now I often read or reread classics. I'm very much into the Egyptian writer Naguib Mahfouz. I've read all his Cairo trilogy. I'm reading his Old Egypt trilogy now. Um, my favorite writer is Lawrence Durrell. I think the Alexandrian Quartet, which I dip into. I've read it start to finish, but now I just pick up a random volume and just read 3 pages of incredibly genius prose. I love Jack Kerouac. Always find inspiration in him and the beat writers who changed my life as when I first read them. Um, and random stuff. I read a lot of music books just because I happen to be a musician and I'm fascinated with the lives of musicians. I just read Albert Eiler, the book about Albert Eiler, um, and and they just sent me a bunch of books from England because I'm a judge for the Penderin Prize. So it's interesting. I'm going to start Alice Coltrane's book very soon. But I just love beautiful writing. I mean, to be my favorite, well, one of my favorite writers is Patti Smith. She has an incredible command of the English language and its beauty, and she's always inspired and encouraged me to to up my literary ante to make sure that that opening sentence is one that is memorable. Uh, and we read each other's work. I just did an introduction to a Led Zeppelin biography, Mick Wall's "When Giants Walk the Earth," and she had me read my opening sentence and my closing sentence, and seeing them through her eyes, I thought, yeah, that's good. That's good.
And you said you read. The one thing I've never been able to do is reread books. My first thought when I finish a book is I want to get another voice in my head. But I've never been someone who rereads. But you said you reread a lot of books.
I reread writers that I find inspirational. I mean, I don't think I'm going to go start to finish the Alexandrian Quartet again, but the writing in it is so beautifully formed that I'll just pick it up and and uh, and I kind of know the story now. So, because when you reread a book, often you're reading it for the plot, how it turns out, if it's fiction or the artist's life or whatever. But when you reread something and you know what's happening, then you can read it for the way the language is put together. And I mean, I reread a lot of Jack Kerouac because I'm just enchanted with how he puts images on a page. Um, I will reread Alain Robbe-Grillet because his sense of, I guess you would call it mise en scene. I'm not exactly sure, but it's just really, really well done. Nick Tosches is another one, a writer that I had the pleasure of knowing quite well, and the way his literary mind works. I know what the story is, but I just like I like to imagine him as he's at the typewriter, putting those words together. That to me is when you're deep into an author and you can kind of sit on their shoulder during their creative process. And I've often felt that, at my best, when I reread my stuff, I'm often, because I've forgotten so much of it. Yeah, I wrote this, but I can see, I can access the moment when I put that one word after another, after another, after another, and all of a sudden got to an end paragraph that, without meaning to, echoes the beginning paragraph of the section. It kind of it's mystical, and I know my work so deeply. No one will ever read my books as deeply as I do, um, which probably is good. But I have to say, I'm very a careful writer. I'm very much into what word will work with the next and how it all moves together. And, I reread my three books, not to mention the articles that I churn out or the liner notes or even the blurbs. Okay. There's an art to a blurb, um, and think, yeah, I've become a writer. Same thing with my songs. I listen to my album and I think all of these songs are have quality. I'm not just patting myself on the back. The lyrics, the melody, the decorations, the soundscape. I'm very careful with what they are. And because in the end, I want to listen to them or read them 10 years from now and think I did good work. And in the end, good work is what it's all about.
And that's it for the latest episode of Songwriters on Process. You can find all of the old episodes on all major streaming platforms and probably some minor ones as well. You can also find them on the Songwriters on Process website. I started the site back in 2011, so that means there are hundreds upon hundreds of interviews with some of the world's best songwriters. So take a deep dive into some of those episodes. They are all great. Of course, I'm biased. Also, shameless plug. My book, Desolation, a Heavy Metal Memoir by Mark Morton with Benno Papari, that is me, is out now on Hachette Books and in all major bookstores. Mark is a good friend of mine. He is the guitarist in the metal band Lamb of God. And so we collaborated on his memoir. I'm biased, but that's a damn good book. Again, it is called Desolation, a Heavy Metal Memoir. And lastly, if you want to get in touch, go to the Songwriters on Process website. You can fill out a handy contact form and it'll get to me that way. You can also email me at ben@songwritersonprocess.com. I'm all ears. Send me your comments, your suggestions, your complaints, people you want me to interview. I get great suggestions all the time. I can't respond to all of the emails because I get a lot of them, but I do read all of them. And let me know your thoughts. If you have ideas for people you want me to interview, there's your chance. And with that, I am out. See you next time.